Hello, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome. It is truly a pleasure to welcome our guest speaker. So please join me in welcoming to our monthly community event, Donald Addu of Climeworks. Donald, as I said, is the US sales manager of Climeworks. He'll tell us about this Swiss direct air capture company that a lot of people associate with the DAC plant in Iceland called Orca. There's been a lot in the media over the past year and a half or so about that. But there's much more to Climeworks, as we'll hear. So Donald, before I turn it over to you, let me just give you a quick idea of the people you're talking with. Like I said, I wasn't able to be on our monthly call last month, unfortunately, but I watched I watched it. I heard about it from Terry, and I was really proud of our team's grasp that was reflected in their comments and questions when we had Thor Kallestad from Minocarbon. It took a few minutes for our group to understand his business model and the ways that they could see his work's involvement in their communities. So in fact, Captain Richard Gillette, who was on the call, he's actually been connecting the US Forestry Department's fire service with Minocarbon to see if in the future, the biomass clean out that the Forest Service does regularly can become part of a biochar operation to prevent CO2 emitting burns and instead convert over to biochar to create energy instead. So a lot of creative thinking happens with this group. Again, I want to remind everyone to please be thinking of questions that you want to ask Donald. And with that, it's a pleasure to turn it over to you. Thanks again for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Rick. Thank you, Terry. I really appreciate the opportunity to be speaking to you. I'm very excited. And as somebody who's came from the nonprofit space, I spent the last 12 years with Citizens Climate Lobby. And so I really believe strongly in the power of grassroots and of organizations like this. So thank you for taking time on your Saturday to be here and come to this presentation. And I'm just delighted to be here with you. So I would like to go ahead and start. Let me see if I can share my screen, and we'll get this off and running. Okay. All right. Does that look good for everybody? All right, very good. So I just want to start here. This picture right here on your right is of our Orca plant. This is the largest direct air capture facility in the world. It has a nominal capacity of 4,000 tons of capture every year, which I think is really, really cool. And so but before I get into it, I just want to start with just an acknowledgement that, when we're talking about climate change, this is really an all hands on deck issue, right? And it's like we need to do everything 20 years ago, right? We've got to do our capture. We've got to do our emission reductions. We need to really take a look at this from a holistic point. And so I'm going to dive into a little bit about our technology, how our facilities work, and kind of where our role is in getting us to a livable world, into a stable climate. So I want to speak a little bit about the difference between carbon offsets and carbon removal, kind of being carbon neutral versus net zero. So one of the things that I have the opportunity to work primarily with companies and their goals to get to net zero emissions, looking at scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. And that just is it's a fancy classification of how you count your emissions, but ultimately it's just what you're responsible for, the CO2 you're responsible for. And right now, one of the preferred ways that companies achieve their net zero targets is through the purchasing of renewable energy credits, RECs. And the way RECs work is, many of you probably already know this, when you generate electricity via clean energy, such as wind or solar, which are the most popular in the US, you also generate a renewable energy credit. And so a company can purchase those renewable energy credits, and in doing so, they get credit for that energy, that carbon-free energy. And that's really important because it basically incentivizes the the purchase and construction of more renewable energy. So it gives us an opportunity to continue to replace fossil fuel energy with clean energy. And that's really important. But as you can see on the left here, you've got 1 ton of CO2 emitted from that energy, that fossil fuel energy production. And then a company purchases a REC. Well, that's great. We're going to add more renewable energy later. But ultimately, that ton of CO2 is still in the atmosphere. It's still there. It has now been added to our carbon cycle, to our natural carbon cycle. So here's where direct air capture comes in. So we have the ability to actually pull that ton of carbon out of the air and getting it out of the carbon cycle entirely. So we started with fossil fuel. We started with the fossil fuel, right? Fossilized carbon. We put it into the atmosphere. We put it into the natural carbon cycle. And now with Climeworks, we can take it out of the carbon cycle entirely and store it permanently underground, refossilizing it. So we go from fossil to fossil, which I think is pretty cool. So how do we do this? How does our technology work? Well, it's actually fairly simple. The actual idea is right here. So we pull ambient air over one of our air capture units, and it goes over a membrane where we've got this sorbent. And the sorbent has a really strong affinity for carbon dioxide. It is in love with carbon dioxide. Absolutely loves to be a part of it. So, and this sorbent is pretty amazing. The surface area of it is incredible. A teaspoon of sorbent has the same surface area as a soccer field. So really tremendous surface area. And so we pull our ambient air just right over this, and that sorbent grabs that CO2. And over the course of about 2 hours, takes us about 2 hours for that sorbent to fill up. It grabs all the CO2 it can possibly hold. And then we close the unit and we heat it up. We heat it up to 100 degrees Celsius. And once it gets to 100 degrees Celsius, that sorbent gets really comfortable. It's like, this feels really good. I'm going to go ahead and release all that CO2. And so it releases that CO2. We end up with pure CO2. And we are then able to mix that with water and store it permanently underground. And then that process takes about an hour. So the entire cycle is a 3-hour process. We're 2 hours open where we're collecting, 1 hour closed where we're removing the CO2, and then we open back up and do it again. And our current sorbents have the ability to go for about 2 years, of about 2-year lifespan. And we've actually just developed a new sorbent that will have a 3-year lifespan. So we're increasing the length and duration of our sorbents, which is going to be really key for us to be able to continue to scale. Oh, I like this graph or this slide because it really shows like how we're doing this specifically in Iceland. Our plants are heated and we get our electricity from the geothermal power in Iceland. And that electricity runs our fans, allows us to collect that CO2 out of the air. And then we pull that CO2 out and then store it permanently underground. It goes into basalt rock formations. And because of the chemistry makeup of the basalt rock, when we inject the fizzy water, essentially we add CO2 to water, you get bubbly water. We inject that into the basalt rock and it actually turns the CO2 to stone. So we're going from a gas to a liquid to a solid. And you can see here in the center picture, that is a picture of CO2 that has been mineralized. So it is actually out of the atmosphere and it will be out of the atmosphere for 10,000 years plus, which is awesome. So I talk a little bit about the permanency of this, because when we think about CO2 removal, most of the time folks jump to natural-based solutions. You know, there are a lot of things that will remove carbon dioxide from the air. You think trees are often popular. We'll talk about trees. We talk about the ocean is a really big carbon sink. There are a lot of different ways that we can pull carbon out of the atmosphere. Rick mentioned biochar. Another great example, agriculture. Our agriculture practices can have a positive impact on pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. But there's one key point that I want you to take away from this, is that when we're planting a tree and when that tree is growing and pulling carbon dioxide out of the air, that's part of the natural carbon cycle. And trees, on average, live about 100 years. And when that tree dies, it's a living organism. When it dies, it'll release that carbon back into the atmosphere. So it's a part of the carbon cycle. And what we've been doing from the Industrial Revolution is we've been pulling this fossilized carbon, this carbon that has been out of the carbon cycle for millions of years, and putting it back into that carbon cycle. And so while these other technologies, while these other natural solutions allow us to reduce the amount that's in the atmosphere at any given time, it's still within that carbon cycle, and it will transition between basically biostorage and the atmosphere going forward. And this is where this type of direct air capture is different, because we're taking it not just out of the air, but taking it out of the carbon cycle completely, and again, refossilizing it. And I think that that's a really important distinction. I want to show you these two pictures here. This is, on the left, is a rendering of our new plant. This is our Mammoth facility, and we're currently under construction. The picture on the right is a current picture. I think this was taken 2 months ago. And so we are expecting this to come online in at the end of this year, or maybe beginning of next year. So we're definitely hopeful by Q1 of 2024, we'll be capturing carbon using our new plant. I want to talk a little bit here about scalability. Our Orca facility is at 4,000 tons a year, and our Mammoth facility will be at 36,000 tons a year. So we're going to go from 4 to 40, which is great. Love a 10x, love a logarithmic scale, right? And then we want to do the same thing for our next plant, which is going to be sited in Louisiana. And we're currently in discussions with the Department of Energy and working through that application process. We're hopeful to get some support from some of the funds for DAC hubs that were allocated via the Inflation Reduction Act. And we are hopeful to have that facility up and running in the 2027-2028 timeframe. That'll get us up to 400,000 tons worth of capture. And then in the 2030s, we want to be in the multi-megaton range. And then by 2050, we want to be cracking that gigaton, basically being able to capture 1 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. And that's pretty amazing. But I think it's also important to put this into perspective, right? So if by 2050, we're able to achieve 1 gigaton, where we can capture a gigaton of carbon out of the atmosphere, that would be amazing. And that's a lot of carbon dioxide. We currently emit 38 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year globally. So if we don't do reduction and we rely just on direct air capture, then even by 2050, we would only be reducing our carbon output by 2.6%. That's not enough, right? It's like we need to be at 100%. Not even that. We need to be at 200, 300%, right? Because even if we flip the switch and tomorrow we don't burn another molecule of CO2, we don't add another molecule of CO2 to the atmosphere, we're still at 417 parts per million. And that's no good, right? We know we've got to be below 350. Really, 320 would be a much better target. And in order to do that, it means we've got to not only reduce and get the actual amount of carbon we're putting into the atmosphere to significantly less than where we are now, but also addressing that legacy carbon. And so I think that Climeworks has a fantastic role to play in this. I think direct air capture is a really important tool. And I look forward to continuing to be a part of this organization, continuing to scale this technology so that we can ultimately get to a livable world, because I mean, that's the whole point of this whole thing, right? So that's it. Those are all the slides I had. I just wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for questions, but I really appreciate y'all listening to me. And I also got my email up here. You can email me at donald.addu@climeworks.com. Cool.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Donald. Really fascinating stuff. We do have a lot of time for questions, which I'm really excited about. I see a couple hands already. So before we get into that, for those of you who aren't familiar with the process here, if you go down to the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on raise hand, that will get you in the queue to ask your questions. So excited to see 4 hands up already. I've got some questions too, but I can't wait to hear what our chapter members have for you. So let's start. I've got Philip, and then just so you know, I've got in the order I'm seeing here, Philip, David, Richard, Melanie. So Philip, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
David Cunard has his hand raised first, so David.
Oh, okay. Great. Thanks.
Okay. Donald, thank you very much. It is exciting. It is kind of thrilling, and I think you benefit from several different attributes of the original location because you've got less expensive energy source to do that drawing and that heating, and also the basalt for the mineralization. But if you succeed in multiplying the present Climeworks project by 9-fold to 36,000 tons a year, I calculate that you will need over 1 million of such plants to get just the amount that we released last year into the atmosphere. How can we possibly be multiplying up in this to the extent that you suggest that is sufficient?
Yeah, fantastic question. So it's twofold. One is our we're gaining efficiency. And so what we're able to do is actually capture more carbon dioxide in a smaller amount than a smaller space than what we did with Orca. And so our Mammoth facility, we have an increased efficiency there. Now it's not a lot, but it is significant. But where we're going to gain a lot of efficiency is in our next phase, which is going to be our plant in Louisiana. It's a different, we're utilizing a little different technology. We're utilizing different designs that allows us to scale significantly. So we're going to be on basically the same amount of space as our Mammoth plant, but instead of being able to capture 36,000 tons, we'll be able to capture 100,000 tons utilizing the same space. And so if we assume that we're going to be able to continue to increase this efficiency, that will help. But ultimately, to your point, like we can't capture the amount of carbon dioxide that goes into the atmosphere. If we continue to emit 38 gigatons of carbon dioxide every year globally, we're not going to achieve our goal. We're not going to keep climate change to we're not going to keep the global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or even 2 degrees Celsius. So this has to be paired with reduction. That's the only way it works, right?
In Louisiana, can I follow up? What energy source or sources are you going to use to do all of the work there, and where will the product go?
Yeah, so we will build a solar facility that will produce it will overproduce for the amount of energy that we need. We're sizing it for about 120% of the amount of energy that we use. However, we will still be connected to the grid because the sun doesn't shine at night, and we still are going to capture at night. So we'll offset the energy, but there's still an emission to it. And then in terms of storage, we'll be storing it. We're going to be storing it 9 kilometers from the site, so it's not directly on site like it is in Iceland, but it's quite close. And so we'll be utilizing our storage facilities there.
I wish you all the luck in the world. We need it.
All right. Thanks, David.
All right. Great questions, David. Okay, over to Philip.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Donald, how does one go about getting a job with Climeworks or with you in your department virtually?
Well, we are currently hiring. So I encourage you to check out climeworks.com. We've got some job postings there, and I know that we're hiring both in the U.S. and in Europe. So that's that would be the best way to check us out.
All right, climeworks.com. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, Richard, over to you.
I should have dropped my hand because actually David asked the question about the source for electricity. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Melanie, you're up.
Thank you, Donald. I've wondered really if there are any issues related to geologic storage, like with perhaps expansion of the material, anything that causes fractures, or now that you've been doing this, what can you tell us about that process is the first question. And second, Is your business model really to use, to be in locations where there's geologic storage available?
Yes. So so to answer the second question first, yes, we do want to be where geologic storage is available, because we, while we do have the ability to pipe CO2 because of some new regulation through the Congress, it's not something that we want to do because it doesn't make sense for us to do it. Mostly because there are a lot of places where geologic storage is feasible, and so we're specifically looking at those locations. And then in terms of the storage itself, the impacts of it, fortunately, it's very, very minimal, because what we're talking about is carbonic acid, essentially. It's just the same stuff makes your Coke fizzy. And so the only concern that we run into is if the acid erodes the caps for our pipes, for the pipes that we're actually using to pipe the CO2 into the ground. And but we're well aware of this challenge. In fact, we work with the EPA. The EPA has regulations specifically around this, and they permit it specifically. So this is something that we're well aware of, and we've got the technology to handle it. And the upside here is, even if we were to experience an event or something happened where we did lose this, we lost containment. We're talking about losing carbon dioxide, right? So we're not talking about methane. We're not talking about things, anything explosive or severely toxic. And so I think that's important. But ultimately, we're very confident that that the permanent storage we're utilizing will be permanent. And we are also, I will say also that we are third-party verified. DMV does our third-party verification. And so they verify both the capture material and the method. So this is, not only do we have a vested interest in making sure that we're doing it right, but we also have we make sure we got folks looking over our shoulder to ensure our integrity.
Thank you. And I would just say that it seems like a perfect model for use there in some sort of carbon negative building materials that would replace other things that were existing in use already that are causing an increase in emissions. Although I know a collaboration of that sort is probably a little more complex than doing it on your own. That would be fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share one little tidbit. The first capture facility that we built was in Hinwil, outside of Zurich in Switzerland, and our first client was Coca-Cola. And so we captured CO2 out of the air and then sold it back to Coca-Cola for them to put it into their drink, which I think was pretty cool. So yeah, I think that there is, and we've been in conversations also about being able to use this type of direct air capture to grab carbon dioxide that then could be used to create sustainable aviation fuel. And so that's a conversation as well. But as you alluded to, Melanie, it is that is more complicated, and so I think that that's a little further down the line.
All right. Thank you. Okay, good morning, Jim. Over to you. Jim, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I have two questions for you. The first question is, where is the facility located in Louisiana? Because I go there maybe twice a year and I would like to see the facility if possible.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we're siting it now. We haven't started construction or anything, but it's going to be sited in Southwest Louisiana in the.
Okay, that's very good.
I can actually tell you the parish if I can remember it. Well, I can't. So,
Okay,
but
very good.
but yeah, it's Southwest Louisiana.
Okay,
Yep.
very good. My second question is this. I know that the cost per ton is exceedingly high for Orca plant, and I know that the DOE is planning to buy or purchase those which are profitable or which are promising. And can you tell me what the price per ton is going to be in the next plant and the next plant? Over.
Yeah, I can't. What I can is I can't because I don't know. What I do know is like our price per ton is $1,100 a ton.
Mhm.
And also, and that is, and we subsidize that. Like it costs us, our cost is $1,500 a ton. So we are currently selling this at a lower cost than what it costs us. But we do that for a couple of reasons, right? It's like, first off, $1,100 a ton is a lot, especially when we're talking with companies that are used to paying $50 a ton for carbon removal. So that's a big price difference. And so a lot of the conversation is around, why is this the price that it is? And, the permanence, the reliability, the measurability, all these things, play into that price. And then we also hope to bring that price down. Not hope, we're going to, because we'll gain by economies of scale. As we build out more capture facilities, our price will go down. When will we see that crossover where where we not only become profitable, but then can begin to lower the price to, $700, $600, $500 a ton. That's we just don't know. I mean, it's just it's going to be up to the market. If we're able to continue to grow and get more and more early adopters that allow us to build out these plants, then we'll be able to drop it faster. If it's more of a slog and we have a harder time getting companies on board to invest in this type of technology, well, then it's going to be longer before we see that cost curve drop. So I think that it's just we're essentially still in a startup phase, and so we've got a lot of variability in our long-term projections for our costs. And so one of the things that we're looking for now is are those companies who are willing to step in, the folks like Microsoft and UBS and Audi. They're all Shopify, all clients of ours who are really helping us achieve these goals and get that cost curve down.
Thank you very much for that answer. I really appreciate it. I realize how hard it is to get the price down, but basically it has to be at $50 a ton or it's not going to be viable, because I mean, even $100 a ton is not going to be viable. But maybe more important than that is the fact that we have to get the gigaton, basically 1 gigaton or more, as soon as possible. And I realize that's a tall order. Over.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. And I'm gonna get on my soapbox here for just a second. It's like $1,000 a ton for a livable world. That's a deal, right? I know it's like, and the other framework I have here is, I've being with Citizens Climate Lobby for so long. We've focused on putting a price on carbon, and it was $15 per ton, and that was always our entry point, is $15 per ton. And now here I am being like, okay, we're selling for $1,100 a ton. And my framework is, look, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And the fact of the matter is the cure is expensive. And so, when I look at, and when I'm having these conversations, especially with our, sustainability folks in these companies, the cheaper way to go is emission reduction. It's like, get your emissions down. That's the cheap thing to do. Do that. And get it down, and put aside some money to clean up the mess that's been made, right? And so here we are, and it's like, so we typically are asking companies to commit 10% of their emission reduction to carbon capture, and that fits directly into our science-based targets too. The SBTI specifically says, you should do a 90% emission reduction, a 10% capture. And we love that model. That makes perfect sense for us. So that's kind of the framework in which we enter that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Over.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim.
All right. Let's go to Todd next.
Yes, good evening. I had the same question actually like David had about Louisiana. I will extend it a little bit. why was Louisiana, the state Louisiana, chosen by Climeworks, since it seems like they have so many troubles in natural disorder with hurricanes and so forth and so on. And is that not a kind of a little bit a risky thing, that there are damages coming down the way? And that's one question. And the second question is, I don't know if I completely understood at the very beginning the carbon which the beautiful trees are sucking in on a daily basis. The carbon is staying inside the tree, and when they are 100 years old and we probably dispose them somehow, then the carbon is basically evaporating again into the environment.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
my next question.
Yeah, so I'll tackle that first. That's exactly right. So the trees pull in carbon dioxide while they're living, and then when they die and they decompose, they release that carbon back into the atmosphere.
Okay.
And yeah, in terms of Louisiana, why did we cite in Louisiana? I think your assessment of concerns for flooding and hurricanes is spot on. I've talked with our engineers and our site selection folks about this specifically. And they're confident that our facility has the ability to withstand hurricane force winds, and that this is not going to be an issue. To be perfectly frank, I think it's a little optimistic. Having grown up in the Southeast and dealt with hurricanes my entire life, I think that sometimes they surprise you. But there's nowhere in the world where we don't assume some risk, right? Iceland is a great example. We had the coldest winter ever in Iceland, and it slowed our production. It slowed our capture ability because it was so cold. So we take that risk. The other is why Louisiana. There's a political aspect to this. As we're making this transition from a fossil fuel economy to a clean energy economy, it's very important for Congress and for the president to engage communities that have been reliant on fossil fuel infrastructure. And so this is a feeling of, we don't want to leave these folks behind. So let's site a direct air capture facility where these jobs have typically been. Okay. And that also works really well for us because of the geologic formations in the Gulf, right there in Louisiana, just as it's really valuable for gas and oil. It also means that we end up with a geology that is very suitable for carbon capture. Okay. So it's a multi-pronged reason as to why we landed in Louisiana.
Okay. Okay. And the last thing, I actually was my plan was to introduce Dr. Daniela Vendetuoli. She is she works at the Institute of Geological Science in Bern at the University of Bern, and I would like to bring her as a member into the organization. And eventually, you guys know her already, and unfortunately, it didn't work tonight.
All right, that's okay. Awesome. Thanks, Todd.
All right, thanks, Todd. Okay, Terry, over to you.
Hey, I wanted to ask a question for Peter Hoberg, who has his camera off and is incapable of asking it today. He wants to know, and I didn't phrase this, but I love the phrasing. How are you working with the oil and gas industry in the US? How are you addressing the backlash of the environmental justice movement about ties to, quote unquote, the evil empire? I just thought it was interesting. It's a great question.
It is a great question. And the easy answer is we're not. So we've drawn a strong line on oil and gas. We do not work with oil and gas companies. We don't offer offsets to them. We don't offer capture for them because of exactly that. It's a concern of being viewed as helping pay to pollute, and there are EJ concerns around the fossil fuel industry, and for good reason. And so for me, I think I'll speak for me, not for Climeworks, but for me personally, I think the oil and gas companies have a responsibility to clean up the mess they made. And so for me, I think it makes a lot of sense for them to pay for direct air capture so that the carbon that they put into the atmosphere, they pay to get out. That seems really simple to me, but Peter, as you astutely put, the politics here are more challenging than that, as are the optics. And so for right now, that is Climeworks' stance on the oil and gas industry.
Thank you for answering that so honestly.
Yeah, my
All
pleasure.
right. Donald, I have a maybe quick question, and it has to do with scaling. So a, a, a metaphor here is like you have a desktop computer, right? And so you've got a metal frame, and inside there's computer chips, right? As time goes on, computer chip efficiency increases, so you can open up the box, swap it out, and you still got the same box, but you got a faster computer. Does that work with DAC? Like, can Orca maybe 5 years from now capture more than 4,000 tons a year, like in the existing Orca facility?
Yes, and we're limited because of the actual way that we do, the way that we're utilizing the design of the plants to draw the air over the sorbent. What we're realizing is the way that it works, the way that Orca was designed works well, but there's a better way to do it. And so we're utilizing the same airflow technology for Mammoth, but we're going to use a different airflow technology for our Louisiana plant. And so there's the design aspect is a limiting factor, but in terms of the sorbent and the efficiency and effectiveness of the sorbent, that is an easy swap. So yes, so we will gain efficiency, but it's got to be a multi look at this.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thanks. Carl.
Yeah. Hey, Don, thanks so much for being here. Some of what I was going to ask has already been addressed, so that's great. And actually, I wanted to tag along on the last thing you said there about the advances in technology, essentially, as you go from Orca to Mammoth to Louisiana. And that feels a lot to me like the early days of solar photovoltaics, right? Where it was wicked expensive and nobody was going to put it on their roof or anything. And governments played a huge role in showing up and saying, we're going to provide subsidies, we're going to do advanced market commitment type purchases, we're going to pay for R&D, et cetera. So I was hoping you could comment a little bit, you touched on it, the role of the governments. Obviously, the DAC hub money that the United States recently has put forward is huge. Can you comment a little more on like what's going on in Europe? And this is an organization that focuses on policy and advocating for policy. So where are the gaps? Like, what do we need to go tell the U.S. Congress to do next? And those kinds of questions, but hopefully on a international basis as well as just U.S. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Carl. Well, I'm definitely more familiar with the U.S. than internationally. I can speak a little bit to what's going on in Europe and our engagement in Europe. A lot of it is around how we're qualifying direct air capture within the voluntary carbon markets, and what that looks like. Kind of basically trying to build a premium into the permanent storage that we're doing versus some of the other storage options. And so that's a focus. In the U.S., there are multiple things that would help us a lot. The money out of the Inflation Reduction Act is great. That's very helpful, and that's what's allowing us to expedite our work in Louisiana right now. And so we are applying for those funds as we speak. In fact, our application was due yesterday. So we are in it to win it on that. So that's going to be helpful. We would love to see the federal government subsidizes fossil fuels to the tune of about $70 billion a year. We would love to see something comparable, but I don't think that's realistic. Ultimately, funding grants is important. Regulatory structure. One of the things that right now the EPA has regulatory authority over all CO2 storage, with the exception of 2 states, North Dakota and I believe Wyoming is the other state, where the EPA has ceded their authority to the states, and the states do the permitting. That's currently a conversation in Congress, basically moving where the EPA still has overarching regulatory authority, but that the states can basically do the majority of the work. And we would really like to see that, because on the whole, states move faster than the federal government. The closer you get to the people, the faster things move. So that's a big aspect. And kind of our and then we would also like to see more clarity from the U.S. government on on why they support direct air capture, kind of setting some standards of direct air capture and carbon offsets would be really great. And then like our big pie in the sky, awesome, best piece of legislation ever would be a piece of legislation requiring companies to capture and remove their CO2. That would be our ideal, right? And it's like you throw your McDonald's cup on the road, you can find $100 for littering, right? And it's like same deal. So we would love to see that.
Great specific answer. We'll get right on it.
I appreciate that.
Amazing. So you all might have seen in the chat, we are running out of time on Q&A. Donald, this has been kind of an epic Q&A session. You're amazing in how you're fielding these so efficiently. We'll get to Cynthia, and then David, if you could drop yours in the chat, we'll make sure to get Donald's answer out in our follow-up email that goes out after this call. So Cynthia, go ahead.
Well, I was just wanting to refer to your ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. It would be nice to see a slide that shows how many trillions of dollars around the world is being spent to clean up all the messes that this climate hazard that we're having. And then the second thing is, we have realized that you are part of the solution, and there's many other solutions coming out. So I felt like you were feeling responsible for the million new plants that need to be brought in, but we're all working together. And I'm telling you, talking to people like you continues to give me hope.
Hey, thanks, Cynthia. Yeah, no, I'm 100%, right? No, it's like we've all got to do our part, and I think that I am without question biased toward Climeworks. I love the technology. I love the company. I think it's an amazing thing, and I'd love to see us continue to grow and gain prominence in this space. I think that the opportunity is tremendous, and ultimately, in terms of a slide of the trillions of dollars that it costs us from climate, and the trillions of dollars that we've given to subsidize the industries that are producing carbon, I think that would be an interesting slide. I also think it would be horribly depressing to make. So I'm not sure if I'll make that one happen, but I really appreciate the context on that.
All right. Well, Cynthia, that was a really great way to wrap up the call. The Q&A session. So thanks for your comments and your participation here, Donald. Again, thank you so much. This has been really awesome. I've learned a lot. I really enjoy hearing from you. I particularly appreciate, with all of your CCL experience, the drill here. You know what we're doing here. You know what we're building here. And so I'm really glad that you were able to be a part of it today. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Love it. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions. I'm happy to be available.